Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where and when you are when you're watching this. This being Chuck's Culture Channel, your one-stop shop for information on the lively arts here in St. Louis and beyond. And this time, honestly, it's mostly about St. Louis, although not entirely. I'm talking with Andy Hahn, who's the executive director of the Campbell House Museum here in St. Louis. He has a brand new book coming out called Mapping St. Louis, which shows historic maps of the city, talks about its history, and in fact shows how St. Louis is both very similar to and in some ways unique and different from other major cities of the same age. As we're talking, the release party for his book will be on October 20th, 2024. We're going to talk about all the things I mentioned earlier and show you some more pictures of maps and of the museum right now. Okay, well, you heard the introduction and saw some pictures there, and here is the man himself, Andy Hahn, who is the executive director of the Campbell House Museum here in St. Louis. Andy, welcome to Chuck's Culture Channel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And as I mentioned in the introduction, you can see the Campbell House Museum behind us. And behind Andy, you can see one of the many maps in his book. And before we get to talking about the book and the maps, which, by the way, is fascinating stuff, whether you live in St. Louis or not, let us talk a bit about the Campbell House Museum, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people outside of St. Louis don't know what it is. I'm not sure how many people who are in St. Louis are familiar with the Campbell House Museum. So what is it? How did it come about?
Yeah, so unfortunately, you're right. I think there's many people who live here who do not know what the Campbell House is, and that's something we hear all too often. But we are an 1851 townhouse at the corner of 15th and Locust Streets in downtown St. Louis. And the museum has been preserved and open to the public since 1943. So we've been welcoming visitors for over 80 years now. In addition to preserving the building, the museum preserves the Campbell's family collection, which includes hundreds of pieces of furniture and furnishings, light fixtures, carriages, and probably most important, tens of thousands of pages of their photographs and documents, which really give visitors a glimpse into the past, that you can hear the Campbell's own words about what St. Louis was like in the Gilded Age.
And who were the Campbell family exactly?
Yeah, Robert Campbell was an Irish immigrant. He came to St. Louis over 200 years ago as a teenager and met a fellow Irishman, a man named John O'Fallon, who gave him his very first job here. And that was as a bookkeeper or a clerk for an outfit called the American Fur Company, which Mr. O'Fallon helped manage here out of St. Louis. And that sent young Robert Campbell's life on a trajectory that would, these early days would shape him for the rest of his life. He went out to the Rocky Mountains. He learned the fur trade business firsthand. It was very rugged and physically quite challenging. He made lifelong friends, one of whom, William Sublette, became his business partner. From there, that business partnership flourished into all sorts of other business. They helped found Kansas City, Missouri. They were involved in banking and in the railroads when they came to this part of the town, and insurance. And eventually Robert owned St. Louis's largest hotel called the Southern Hotel.
The Southern Hotel. Okay, yeah, and I think I saw a picture in your book of that.
Yes.
So, of course, people who aren't in St. Louis may not know this, but there used to be a lot of these ornate homes from this period in the city, and some of them are still there. Some are still, many in fact, are owned by people who are the equivalent in terms of wealth of the Campbells back then. But this one became a museum, and so stepping into this is kind of like going back into time, isn't it?
That's exactly right. So this house is the last remaining vestige from this neighborhood, which was called Lucas Place. In the Gilded Age St. Louis, they called this the Fifth Avenue of St. Louis. Guidebooks to the city talked about how you had to walk up and down Lucas Place to see how the 1% lived, to see the beautiful trees and the lovely fences. But like I said, the Campbell House is the last one remaining. So it is really a unique survivor in that regard. Not only is the building still here, but it's so well preserved on the inside as well.
And if you look down here in the video description field, folks, you will see a link to the Campbell House Museum's website. Click on there and you can get a feel of what the place looks like. Of course, the main reason we're doing this right now is that you have written a book about not just the history of St. Louis through maps. And it involves aspects of St. Louis's history that are both similar to and different from those of other cities. We were talking about that before I started the recording. So what is it about St. Louis and what is revealed through these maps that shows how it both parallels and doesn't parallel the history of other older cities in the United States?
Well, St. Louis is, of course, unique for lots of reasons. The earlier maps certainly illustrate that its uniqueness in its age. It's now over 260 years old, and its colonial past. Has a strong, of course, French roots, but through most of its colonial era, this was actually a Spanish colony. And many of the early maps I feature in the book reflect that. In fact, the very first map of St. Louis, which the first map to show the street grid of St. Louis from 1767, was actually done by a French-speaking military officer for the Spanish authorities in Madrid, in Spain. And that map actually still resides in the National Library in Spain. It is a very beautiful, colorful map. So that map is quite unique to St. Louis's story. But as you said, a number of them tell a story similar to other American cities. There's a great one from 1882 from the St. Louis Public Library collection that talks about waters and sewers. And it shows the development and the growth of the city water and sewer system through the second half of the 19th century. Of course, when the city was founded here and for its first 100 years, there were no public water or sewer systems in terms of bringing that into your home. But after the Civil War, that started to develop quite rapidly. And there's one map that shows how that system radiates out from downtown and starts to go north and south and eventually west as well. And that would, of course, been the norm for most American cities in this era. So it's a good way to contrast both similarities and differences.
Yeah, well, in fact, that issue, the issue of water supply and public health in general, is one that a lot of cities worldwide faced right around the late 18, early 1900s. London notoriously had to do a major cleanup of the Thames.
And I'll add that a lot of cities are still facing.
Yes.
Maybe not cleanliness of the water supply, but the amount of water that's required for the population. And of course, the American West is the perfect example of that. And we are very fortunate to live where we are, that we seemingly have an endless water supply, mainly supplied by our rivers. But so that particular map from 1882 kind of tells that story. It talks about the early reservoirs, our famous water towers.
Yes.
Which actually are not water towers technically, they're standpipes, but we're also unique in that we have 3 of these historic ones remaining. I believe there's only 7 in the whole country and 3 are here in St. Louis.
I think that's right. Yes. And so a lot of people don't know what they actually did, but they were a way of keeping the water pressure more or less equal.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. To maintain a more or less uniform pressure throughout the system as people turn water on and off. That's what those pipes did. So
now there are also things about St. Louis that make it unique. One of them, as we were talking about before I hit the record button, is a remarkably stupid political decision that the city made in 1867 and which has caused us problems right up until the present day.
Yeah, that's of course the Great Divorce, when residents of the St. Louis City and St. Louis County, and at that point, St. Louis City was part of St. Louis County, voted to separate legally. The state constitution had to be changed to allow that to happen, but it was done. And after 1876, the city formally exited St. Louis County. So I believe there's only one other instance of a county or a city living independently, so to speak, outside of a county, and that's in Baltimore, Maryland. So, oftentimes visitors here, we have to explain the difference between St. Louis City and county that each have their own courthouse and that they're unique differences between them. And so there's a map, actually the map behind me, which really shows that one of the first ones to illustrate these newly set city boundaries on the western edge of the city as a result of the divorce.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's a problem we're still grappling with today, and there are many attempts to fix it. Probably the closest we ever got was in 1962.
Hmm.
That's another map in the book when something was proposed called the Borough Plan, and that was to divide the city and the county into a series of boroughs, much like New York City, and all of those boroughs would reside within a newly formed St. Louis County. Unfortunately, it failed, and every attempt since then has also failed in one regard or another. So,
What is there in this book that I think would be of interest to anyone, whether they live in St. Louis or not? I mean, I think it's fascinating, and I'm fascinated by maps anyway.
well, I think you, in your last comment, hit the nail on the head. And in writing this book and preparing this book, I have found quite interestingly that many people are just fascinated by maps. It doesn't matter what the map is of. Maps have a power of drawing you in and capturing attention and making you want to get closer and have a look. So, whether you are from St. Louis or interested in St. Louis, as examples of the art of the map maker and map design, this book has it all. Some of the maps were created for exploration and navigation. The map behind me was essentially like a tourist map.
Mm.
There are pictorial maps and fantasy maps, all different types of maps included. And so I was certainly very aware of that as I was developing the maps to include that it, wanted all different kinds, because of course different kinds appeal to different people, and visually they can look quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings up one of the maps that, at least here locally, is probably the most well known, the one Compton and Dry did in
Yes,
1875. Do I have the date
that's
right?
correct. Yep, 1875.
So for people who may not be familiar with that, I'll show some images from it as we're talking, but that's a rather remarkable map, really.
It is probably the most famous map in the book in terms of map makers. Now, to be clear, that's technically not a map.
Mm.
It's a view of St. Louis. Although what I included in the book is a map, and it's the key to the map, to the views in the book. So there, in my book, the map for Pictoria St. Louis shows the whole city, and it shows the city divided up into a series of squares, and each one of those squares is numbered, and those numbers correlate or correspond to the views in Pictoria St. Louis, and there's 110 of them. And it is remarkable for its ambitiousness. It's believed that it was an economic total failure, but it's considered an artistic triumph because it was able to replicate so much detail of the city as it existed in 1875. And some historians have speculated or hypothesized that it's so exact that even every tree that you see on this view, and there's hundreds of thousands of trees, were real. But they actually counted the trees and put them in the right
Really?
spot. So it is today considered the largest view of any city ever completed in the history of the world.
Yeah,
it's if you put it all together, it's about 18 feet long. So it's an impressive thing.
yeah, and it is amazing. I, of course, downloaded a section that shows my neighborhood in
As a lot of
Seward.
people do.
Yeah,
And it's amazing when you blow that up, the amount of detail in it.
well, that's what's astonishing. Do we know how they did this? Was this done with like an air with hot air balloons, or how did
Well,
they
people have speculated that, but there's no evidence of that.
Okay.
It was just careful, a small group of people carefully just kind of surveyed the city with sketch pads and yeah, it's amazing. Part of it is practice. It's a different, a specific type of angle they use to draw those, and the people who were preparing those were really good at it. And there is kind of a formula to it, but it is amazing the amount of detail they were able to achieve.
Yeah, and I'll have a link to where people can take a look at that also, because that's available for purchase, as a matter of
Yeah,
fact, and also online for free.
right, exactly.
So anyway, Andy, thanks for taking a little bit of time to talk to us about this project. Anything else you'd like us to talk about, either about your book or about the Campbell House Museum, before we close out here?
Sure. I'll just add that here down at the museum, we're always trying to put on programs that appeal to St. Louisans. I mean, most of our programs are created for local people, uh, whereas our visitation is about half and half, local and out of town.
Mm.
But this fall, we have got a walking tour of this neighborhood. We have a special twilight tours done by the Morning Society of St. Louis the Friday
Yeah.
before Halloween. And then the Thursday after Thanksgiving, we have our annual holiday historic house tour, our Christmas tour. So most of the Christmas traditions that we celebrate today were created in the era of the Campbells, developed. And so these old houses are great to see at Christmas time. And we do that in conjunction with the Field House and the Demonell Mansion. And the
The
details
field,
for all those on our website.
yeah, very good. Yes, if you are going to be in St. Louis as a tourist or for a convention or something, definitely check out the Campbell House Museum. It is quite the cool tourist site. It reminds me about well, it reminded me a bit of the Dry House Museum in Chicago. I don't know if you've seen that.
I have, yeah, there are
Uh,
some similarities in kind of their story of preservation, although visually they're of course quite different. Um, we are being about almost 50 years older than that. So,
mhm. But yeah, check it out, folks. And remember Chuck's Culture Channel on YouTube, on the internet. Let people know, because I don't have an advertising budget. Andy, thanks so much.
my
And
pleasure.
everybody else, check out the rest of the stuff I have on YouTube. This is Chuck Lavazzi signing off for Chuck's Culture Channel. See you next time.